Hey, I just parked in beautiful downtown Ventura, California to test this, the brand new Viltrox 40mm f2.5 for Sony E-mount full frame. Now, I don't have a lot of time to spend with this lens, so instead of sitting in the studio looking at lens test charts all day, I thought I'd take this lens out, hit the town, and see what kind of photos we can get. It is high noon right now, so the lighting's not going to be perfect, but let's see what we can do. All right, I'm back in the studio, but before we get started, I do want to say that Viltrox did send me this lens for free, but no money has changed hands and I'm in no way obligated to give them a positive review. As always, with reviews like this, I'll do my absolute best to give you guys my honest opinions. If you've seen some of my other videos, then you probably already know that I'm a big fan of the Sony 40mm f2.5 G lens. So naturally, when Viltrox reached out to me and said that they have a new, more affordable alternative to that lens, I jumped at the chance to try it out. And here it is. And as you can see, it's a pretty simple lens. There are no buttons, switches, there's no aperture ring or weather sealing. In fact, the only control you'll find on it is this fly-by-wire focus ring. It has a mostly plastic construction. It's a little longer and larger in diameter than the Sony lens, but it's still a tiny lens and it does weigh noticeably less than the Sony. Although the Viltrox lens is mostly plastic, the build quality is still pretty good, especially for the price. The Viltrox lens is going to sell for $168 US. Now that's compared to the Sony lens, which sells for over 3 times that at almost $600 US. A lens hood is included, and unlike the Sony, Viltrox went with a more traditional pedal style lens hood, which I like because I can actually flip it around and attach it to the lens when not in use, unlike the Sony, where you can't do that. It's either on or you gotta take it off and throw it in your pocket, which is not nice. The camera I use for all of my test shots is a Sony a7 IV with all of the lens corrections turned off, no filters on either of the lenses, and I was using mechanical shutter. All the photos you're going to see have very minimal editing done. If anything, I adjusted exposure and white balance, and I did a little bit of cropping. Overall, I'm happy with how sharp this lens is. I did notice that it got a little soft when you're wide open at f2.5. It's totally not a deal breaker, and it does sharpen up pretty fast as you stop down. It's not as sharp as the Sony, but I don't think you're really gonna notice in real world scenarios unless you're really pixel peeping. While I have these images up, let's take a look at LoCA, or longitudinal chromatic aberrations. As you can see, both lenses perform pretty similarly, and there definitely is some LoCA with both of them, but I didn't notice it too much in real world use. And don't forget that LoCA is pretty easy to remove in post. The bokeh characteristics of these two lenses is very different. The Viltrox I found to have a cleaner bokeh with less onion ringing and spots, and that holds true even as you stop down the lens. The Viltrox also has less cat's eyeing on the edges of the frame when compared to the Sony, but the Viltrox also tends to brightly outline the bokeh while the Sony does not. You can see here how the outlining affects a real-world shot in the transitional area of these flowers. Bokeh quality is very subjective, so it's hard to say which one is better. The Viltrox will tend to give you a cleaner, less distorted bokeh, but it may look a little busy because of the bright outlining that you see. While the Sony's bokeh is less clean and there is some cat's eyeing, so you may tend to see a little swirling effect because of that cat's eyeing, but because it doesn't have the bright outlines, it may tend to look a little smoother. Let me know down in the comments which you prefer. The next topic kind of goes hand in hand with bokeh, and that's minimum focusing distance. The next shot is taken with the Viltrox at its minimum focusing distance of 34 centimeters. And this shot is taken with the Sony at its minimum focusing distance of 25 centimeters. Notice how much more magnification and bokeh you're getting with the Sony. You may have already noticed in some of my previous images that the Viltrox has noticeably more vignetting than the Sony. That's true across the board all the way from F2.5 to F16. I did notice though that it's the worst when you're wide open at f2.5 and it quickly gets better as you stop down. Also, remember that lens corrections are off for all of these shots and that it's really easy to remove vignetting in post. So I'm not really worried about it because, to be honest, for this type of photography that I would do with this lens, street photography or everyday carry, I actually don't mind a little bit of vignetting. The Viltrox has STM focusing motors, which is the lead screw type of focusing system, while the Sony has their dual linear focusing motors. I did notice a difference in focusing speed between the Sony and the Viltrox, with the Viltrox being slower. Also, in low light situations, I did notice that the Viltrox was hunting around for focus more than the Sony. Also, the STM focusing motors that are in the Viltrox are noticeably louder than the Sony, but they are still very quiet. It's just that the Sony linear focusing motors are essentially silent. You can't hear anything. All that being said, I'm still very impressed with the autofocus capabilities of this lens, especially for the price. Sure, you're not going to catch me shooting sports or action with this lens, but for what I think this lens is intended for, street photography and everyday carry, I think the focus speed is plenty fast, and more importantly, it's very accurate when it locks on. For those of you that like to do some manual focusing, the Viltrox has a focus-by-wire manual focus ring, just like the Sony. But unlike the Sony, the Viltrox's focus ring throw is super long. I found that it actually slowed me down a little bit if I had to do a really long focus pull. Luckily, these lenses do have a USB-C port on the bottom, so I'm hoping that that can be updated with a firmware update in the future. If you're curious, I did measure the focus throw on both of these lenses going from minimum focusing distance all the way to infinity, and with the Sony lens, I measured about 170 degrees, and on the Viltrox, I measured about 270 degrees, just to give you an idea of the difference. I'm not a big Sunstar guy, and I don't really pay attention to that too much, but I know a lot of you out there are, so here are some comparison shots of Sunstars, comparing the Viltrox and the Sony. I actually prefer the look of the Sunstars coming out of the Viltrox. Now the next thing I looked at was lens flaring. Now I thought the Sony was really going to blow the Viltrox out of the water in this test, but that definitely wasn't the case. The Sony was slightly better, but they were pretty close. One thing to note was that I did not use lens hoods for either lens during these tests. For all you video shooters out there who are worried about focus breathing, I'm happy to report that the Viltrox performs really well. Very minimal focus breathing right out of the box, much less than the Sony, which had a pretty good amount of focus breathing. However, the Sony does allow you to use the focus breathing compensation feature that's found in the newer Sony bodies, which obviously is going to give you essentially zero focus breathing, but with a small crop. Luckily, the Viltrox has very minimal focus breathing, so I really don't even think you're going to miss that focus breathing compensation feature with this lens. All right, so what are my final thoughts? Well, neither of these lenses is perfect. When I'm using the Viltrox lens, I do find myself missing some of the bells and whistles that you get with the Sony, like the focus hold button, the AF/MF switch, the aperture ring, the weather sealing, and especially the lightning fast autofocus that you get with the Sony. However, for the price, I think that Viltrox did a fantastic job, and I think that they cut costs in all the right places. Now you have to remember that the Viltrox is selling for $168 US, while the Sony is selling for almost $600 US. I would have no problem recommending the Viltrox lens to people who are just starting out or people on a tight budget who are looking for a small, fast, lightweight prime that has good autofocus. Sure, I do feel like I am missing some features on the Viltrox lens, but where it really counts, image quality, I think that Viltrox is doing a great job, and I can confidently say that I think that this lens is one of the best bangs for your buck on the market. All right, well that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. If you're curious what this looks like on an A7C, there you go. Pretty nice and tiny. If this is your first time here, my name is Matt and I make videos about photography, video, I do gear reviews, all that good stuff. So if you don't want to miss out on any future content, please consider liking and subscribing because it helps me out a lot. Again, my name is Matt and I will catch you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.